Suzaku is a rank 4 defensive pilot. Let's go over his abilities. So first he has always so sudden, which makes sense because in the anime he mentioned that when Yuffie said that she wanted to like love him and stuff, and he was like, oh, you're so impulsive and all that stuff. Anyway, that's why the effect has that name. It reads, heals 17.5% of this unit's HP and grants a shield equal to 17.5% of its max HP or health after reaching specific offensive and defensive values. And the other effect is, yes, Your Highness, increases the unit's attack power by 35% for 17.5 seconds every 5 hits. Also increases the night frame skill gauge by 43.7%. Here's the pros of this new Suzaku. He has high health, high defense, heals himself, and also gives himself a shield, so a very good defensive pilot. He also has balanced attack stats for both range and melee, which makes sense because the Lancelot has both of these weapons. And because of his high attack stats, he can somewhat serve as a replacement for Colin, or a substitute rather, if you don't have her. And of course, he's kind of like the other Suzaku, who's also a defensive pilot with high melee stats. Once we get the new Yuffie, he'll be even better, and he gets a really nice first year anniversary boost. And now for the cons. He has a very slow interval of attack, which kinda sucks because his second ability only occurs if he attacks 5 times, or after 5 hits. But if he's slow to attack, that won't happen as often as you would think. This character, while having pretty good stats and good healing abilities, is not a game changer like the original Colin, so he might not be as useful if you already have really good defensive pilots on your team. And from my own personal experience, I never used him outside of the Britannian faction wars because I already had a solid team by the time I got him. But again, that's going to depend on your situation. Now let's move on to the new Lelouch. Lelouch is a rank 4 Annihilator pilot. Let's go through his abilities. First, he has Black Rebellion. 3 seconds after placement and every 20 seconds thereafter increases the night frame skill gauge of all deployed Black Knight ally units by 35%. And he also says, you people are just getting in my way. In case you're wondering what that's from, there's an episode, I believe it's actually when the Gawain first appeared, where all the airships were coming after him, and he said these people are in my way, so he blows them all up to show off the Gawain's new weapon. These are obviously based on the show, and that's a great quote from it, although I thought it was a little different, but doesn't matter. Now to the effect. Upon deployment, and every 30 seconds thereafter, increases damage against flying units by 140% for 30 seconds while reducing damage received from flying units by 0.55%. Okay, so now the pros of this new Lelouch. First of all, when it comes to flying enemies, this is probably one of the best anti-air pilots in the game and will be for a very long time. Arguably still is today in the Japanese version. And it's nice that he reduces damage from flying enemies because in the future, in the harder levels, whether it be the quest, expedition, doesn't matter, the flying enemies will deal even more damage. So having a unit that can deal extra damage to them while also reducing damage that he receives from them is very useful. He has pretty high range attack power and will get a nice first year anniversary boost, which won't be to the attack power, it's the health and defense, which this character definitely needs more of because durability is one of this character's weaknesses. Its first ability to boost the skill gauge of everyone in the Black Knights is very useful, not just for himself, but for everyone, of course, in that faction, and it combos well with the Gawain, which we'll get to later. And just like any other pilot that's named Lelouch, as we get more units like Kaguya and Anniversary Colin, and new Nightmare frames like the Shinkiro and the Kagorai or Kegorai, I always pronounce that Nightmare frame incorrectly, but the point is, when we get more stuff, this pilot will become even better than he already is, which is great. Now for the cons. He can't boost his own attack power, which kinda sucks, so 900 is quite a lot, but he won't boost it beyond that, unless of course you're attacking flying enemies. And that's the real problem with this pilot. He's only really good against flying enemies, not ground. So while that's not terrible, it means he's just limited to niche situations where you're fighting lots of flying enemies. And don't get me wrong, you could probably use him in situations where you're not fighting really difficult flying enemies, but that's probably when you're playing the normal missions and it's just for fun at that point. But for the really hard missions, unless you're fighting flying enemies, using this Lelouch doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So he has limited uses, but I will say that when you do need him and you have him, you'll be very happy. Now let's move on to the Lancelot Flight Enabled version. Here is the Lancelot Flight Enabled version. It has 2 weapons. We'll start with the melee first. It's also a float unit, or it has a float unit, which is pretty good. So its base range is just 1 spot ahead, and it hits hits 2 enemies within range, which is really good. 260 attack is not bad either. And the special attacks 2 enemies within range at 3.75 times attack power and also inflicts 8k damage on top of that. So fixed damage is always appreciated. The special range is absolutely insane. Then we get to the range weapon, which is also obviously floating. Hits 2 enemies in range, 325 attack power. Remember, if you want that 325, you have to upgrade both weapons to get it. Otherwise, it's only 305 damage. Keep that in mind. It works the same way as the Lancelot, and really all Nightmare Frames with multiple weapons work this way, except for the Sarlin custom. Anyways, back to the long range weapon. So it hits 2 enemy units within range, and the special attacks 3 enemies within range at 4.5 times your attack power, and also inflicts 8,000 damage on top of that. By the way, if you're using Suzaku, it'll be even higher, like both the specials. In case you didn't realize that, he improves the skill of both the Lancelot's specials. Here's the pros for the Lancelot Flight Enabled version. First of all, the range weapon is the best one in terms of actual range. I use the word range twice, but you know what I'm saying. It can attack 5 spaces ahead of you, unlike Dalton's, which only attacks 4, and believe me, they're going to construct maps that take advantage of that. Also, it attacks enemies around you, which is kind of useful as well, so it's not just in front, but also around you. Because it has a float unit, it also has more usability than Dalton's Gloucester, and for the most part, this thing kind of replaces his. However, if you don't get this Nightmare Frame, you can manage for most things using Dalton's Gloucester, but this thing is so much better, obviously. And it's not just the range of this weapon, but also the damage output. It has 325 attack power, plus the special deals even more damage, so this thing is very devastating. Also, it's really good for healers, because you can heal from a distance without putting the healer in danger, because again, this Nightmare Frame has really awesome range. Even now, this Nightmare Frame is still useful on the Japanese side. They've only released one other Nightmare Frame in the game, which has similar range to it in terms of 5 spaces ahead, as far as I'm aware. And even though that Nightmare Frame is really good, it doesn't have a float unit, which kind of balances this all out. Now, the melee weapon is just as good as the range one, specifically the special, because the range of that thing is incredible, attacking in front, but also the sides of you. It's a really nice spread and allows you to take out multiple enemies with the Lancelot Flight Enabled version, besides the ones that are in front of you. The base damage is okay, but like I said, the special is really good. And in certain situations, it's exactly what the doctor ordered. So all around, this is a very powerful Nightmare Frame. Now, for the cons, the only one I really have for this thing is the fact that while the range weapon is really good, it's sometimes awkward to fit it in on every single map. So sometimes it may not be as relevant as, say, a regular Lancelot, a Sarlin, or something of that nature, because those ranges are more general, where it's just in front of you, where this thing obviously is 5 spaces ahead and surrounds you. If you are clever, you can make it work on most stages, but keep in mind, it can be kind of clunky and awkward. So there will be instances where it's not that useful, and you'd probably prefer using its melee weapon or just a different range Nightmare Frame altogether. And for the melee weapon, while it's very good, obviously they will power corrupt this Nightmare Frame with better melee weapons, including the one on the Lancelot Conquista. That's not a fair knock against this Nightmare Frame, because obviously everything gets power crept. Overall, it's a very powerful Nightmare Frame. I thought it was complete trash when it first came out, but as time passed, I realized this Nightmare Frame is actually really good. Now let's move on to the Gawain. Okay, here's the Gawain. It's also a float unit Nightmare Frame, but only has a range weapon, at least for now. It hits 2 enemies within range, and the special attacks all enemies within range at 5.5 times attack power, and increases the attack power of all Black Knight ally units by 8.5% for 15 seconds. Wait, attacks all enemies within range? Really? I could have sworn it was 8, not all. I think that's a bad translation. Hey, if someone can try this out and say they can attack more than 8 enemies at one time, let me know, but I'm pretty sure it's 8, not all. But okay. Here's the pros of the Gawain. The attack power, the base one, is okay at 270. That does get the job done most of the time, so that's alright. The special is absolutely insane, not just because it attacks everyone in range apparently, but also the fact that it attacks 4 spots ahead, which is currently the best of any Nightmare Frame in the game. Even the Lancelot Flight Enabled version might have more range at 5 spots ahead, but only attacks straight ahead, versus this Nightmare Frame, which attacks 3 spots going upward. So basically, you can do an insane amount of damage, and there will be pilots in the game that can exploit this ability, like New Year's C2, or of course the Lelouch that came out with this Nightmare Frame. so really good stuff all around. It will get a melee weapon down the road, which will make this Nightmare Frame even better at 300 attack power, which is another reason to maybe go for this Nightmare Frame even if you're not impressed by it currently. It also has pretty good defense at 280. And now to the cons, because unfortunately there's quite a lot. This Nightmare Frame does not inflict fixed damage, which makes its ability not as useful down the road. It has really bad base range with only attacking 2 enemies in front of you as opposed to 3 like the Sarlin or the normal Lancelot, which really sucks. So basically, you're using this Nightmare Frame for the special, and attacking enemies normally is okay. You can make it work, but most of the time it's just super annoying. And the last issue with the Gawain is that you have to charge the skill. So normally in this game, as you damage other enemies or they attack you, your Nightmare Frame skill gauge fills up. But with the Gawain, it fills up on its own regardless of what your pilot is doing. Sometimes that's very useful because things are not happening on the battlefield, but you need the Gawain special ready to go. And other times it's really annoying because if you're in the middle of a battle and you want to activate your special now, not for breakfast right now, then it's not that great because you have to wait a period of time. You also have to time the shots better because of this annoying little effect they added to the Gawain. Does it mean it's complete crap? No, but it just means that while you're using it, you have to understand that you can't just willy-nilly fire off the specials whenever you feel like it. You gotta make each shot count, which is kind of in theme for the Gawain from the anime, but still, it's super annoying. So with that in mind, should you summon from this banner? Well, if you want solid Nightmare Frames, I'd say yes. Well, 1 solid Nightmare Frame and 1 niche use only, in my opinion. Or not niche use only, but the Gawain's okay, unfortunately. Anyways, the answer is yes. Or if you want a really good defensive pilot or a really good anti-air pilot that'll come in handy later on down the road. Keep in mind that neither pilot is absolutely groundbreaking or required for your future success in this game. So not having either one will not be a major factor. We of course are going to get better banners down the road like Christmas and New Year's. Also keep in mind they're going to release another banner that'll give us the Gawain and the Lancelot Flight Enabled version, but they will be in separate banners. There's going to be a Cecile and C2 banner that gives away the Gawain with the melee weapon, and there's going to be the Knight of Seven Suzaku banner, which I like to call Angry Suzaku, which someone in my Discord server coined the phrase, but that's what we call him, Angry Suzaku, which also comes with the Lancelot Flight Enabled version, and I believe that one has the range weapon unlocked instead of the melee, which for some people is probably what you want anyways. In 2 Nightmare Frame boss events from now, they're going to release a Lancelot Flight Enabled version. Although this one's only going to have the range weapon, it'll have less defense and attack power than the normal Lancelot Flight Enabled version, but for budget players this is really nice, so you'll have another opportunity to get the Lancelot if you don't get it here. So unless you have a lot of Sakuradite or you just started playing the game, I'd probably skip this banner. If you have an already established team, these characters are not going to necessarily put you over the edge further than you already were, and while the Nightmare Frames are kind of a mixed bag, again, if you have a solid team, you don't need these pilots. I'm sure there's going to be one difficult map in the extra missions that's going to require the Lancelot Flight Enabled version because of the range to hit certain enemies. But in the future, we'll get other Nightmare Frames, like I mentioned, that will help out with that, and you don't have to complete the extra missions right now to collect all the awards for the event, or I should say the chapter event. By the way, if you are new to this game or you need a refresher, check out my video right here where I go over my entire tier list for all upcoming banners, which people keep asking me about, even though I made this video actually a few months ago. So go check that out right now.